In the quiet town of Lawrence County, South Carolina, a case unfolded with an unexpected twist that would shake the community to its core. It raised profound questions about justice, evidence, and the burden of proof in the legal system. This is the death of 16-month-old Audrina Hepburn in October 2009. It led to a complex legal battle that will ultimately reach the South Carolina Supreme Court, leaving many to wonder whether justice was served. As I said, a major twist is coming. So on October 12, 2009, it began as what seemed like an ordinary evening in the Hepburn household. You had Ashley Hepburn, a young mother of two, her daughter, 16-month-old Audrina, and her 2-year-old son named Owen. They were living with Ashley's mother, Doris Davis, and Davis's boyfriend, David Crumley. Ashley was separated from her husband, Daniel Hepburn. He is the father of Audrina. Daniel was stationed in Washington with the military. Ashley herself had been dating Brandon Lewis for approximately 5 months. He is the other suspect in this case. Now, the evening routine was typical for the family. Between 8 and 8:30 p.m., Ashley, the children, Davis, and Crumley shared dinner together. After the meal, Ashley prepared to give the children their baths, while Davis and Crumley retired to the bedroom on the opposite side of the house. It was around this time Brandon Lewis arrived at the residence. However, earlier that day, Lewis had actually visited around 3:30 p.m., but he had left after an argument with Ashley. She had been stressed about not receiving a job offer she had hoped for, and their initially playful interaction had escalated when she slapped him after he called her an inappropriate name. What? Despite this earlier conflict, Lewis returned that evening and helped Ashley get the children ready for bed. Little Audrina was described as fussy that evening, which wasn't entirely unusual for a teething toddler. Ashley gave her daughter a bottle around 9 p.m. and administered Oragel to help with the discomfort from teething. After putting Audrina to bed, Ashley, Lewis, and the boy Owen settled in the living room to watch the NFL. That evening took a turn when Owen accidentally touched Lewis in the face with his elbow while they were fighting. This incident sparked an argument between Ashley and Lewis about disciplinary tactics and parenting approaches. When Ashley told Owen to brush his teeth, he refused. She then touched him, causing him to cry. The tension in the household was palpable. Then at 10 p.m., Ashley took Owen to the bedroom, where they settled in to read books, falling asleep together. Lewis remained in the living room, continuing to watch TV. And according to Lewis's later testimony, he checked on Audrina around 11 p.m. He opened the door. She popped up, her head appearing alert and normal. Lewis then went to Ashley's bedroom and tried to wake her up. He said, "I'm going to watch a movie. I'm hungry. There's food. Do you want some?" She said, "I'm okay," and she went back to bed. Lewis made himself some food and returned to the living room to continue watching TV. But then, what happened in the early morning hours of October 13 would forever change multiple lives. According to the timeline, between 1 and 1:30 a.m., Lewis checked on Audrina again. This time, however, something was terribly wrong. Lewis testified that when he looked into the room, Audrina didn't stick her head up this time. He found her lying on her stomach with her head against the rails of her crib. When he tried to rouse her, she was completely unresponsive. In a panic, Lewis picked up the child, rushed to Ashley's bedroom. Ashley awoke to find Lewis holding her unresponsive daughter, and the scene that followed was one of chaos and desperation as they immediately woke Davis and Crumley, who dialed 911. Paramedics arrived around 1:40 a.m. and transported Audrina to Self Regional Hospital in Greenwood. At the hospital, medical staff noticed something was seriously wrong. Audrina had numerous lesions and small red spots caused by broken blood vessels on her body. She had retinal hemorrhaging, labored breathing, and was completely unresponsive. When physicians examined her more closely, they discovered she had sustained a subdural hematoma, bleeding in the brain that extended from the front to the back of the right side. The medical testimony, in this case, would prove to be crucial and deeply troubling. Dr. Michelle Curry, who treated Audrina at South Regional Hospital, explained that a subdural hematoma doesn't happen spontaneously. You see, she described it using an analogy that would resonate throughout the trial. She said, if you think of the brain as jello inside of a very hard mold, and if you shake that mold hard enough, the jello separates from the side. When that happens in the brain, the little veins that are in between the mold and the jello shred, and you get the bleeding around the brain. Dr. Curry's professional opinion was that Audrina's injuries were caused by an acceleration-deceleration movement, similar to what might occur in a car accident or in cases of shaken baby syndrome. This type of injury, she explained, results from violent tossing that causes the brain to move within the skull, severing blood vessels and causing bleeding. Now, Dr. Robert Siegler, the medical director of the Pediatric Intensive Care Unit at Greenville Memorial Hospital, where Audrina was transferred, concurred with this assessment. He testified, due to the nature and severity of her injuries, Audrina had sustained aggressive trauma due to mistreatment. The injuries were so severe that Dr. Mary Fran Croswell, another physician, testified they were consistent with a fall from several stories more than a story high. And perhaps most significantly, all the treating physicians agreed on one crucial point. Audrina would not have appeared normal immediately after sustaining all these injuries. You see, they felt she would have had symptoms virtually immediately after an injury this severe, and that she would have at least been in a coma and likely have had more severe symptoms than that. Dr. Croswell emphasized that the severity of the injuries would have brought about a drastic change in the toddler's behavior that would have been instantly noticeable to her adult caregivers. The medical testimony would become central to this case, as it established that whoever inflicted these injuries on Audrina would have immediately known something was wrong. And that's the key point. Who did it? Because whoever did would have known how bad she was injured. So, as medical staff worked to save Audrina's life, law enforcement began their investigation. The Lawrence County Sheriff's Office and the Department of Social Services were notified, and both Ashley and Lewis were asked to provide statements about what happened. Lewis was the first to speak. He gave his initial statement to Officer Ben Blackman around 6 a.m. on the morning of the incident. Now, in his first statement, Lewis provided a straightforward account. He found Audrina unresponsive in her crib and immediately alerted Ashley. He made no mention of hearing any disturbances during the night or earlier when they had the argument. However, after speaking with the grandmother, who urged him to tell officers everything he knew, Lewis returned to give a second statement. This time, his account was dramatically different and far more detailed. He now revealed that he heard Audrina crying during the night, and then he said he could hear Ashley's loud footsteps going down the hall to the child's room. He testified that he then heard Audrina crying even louder, as if she was being shaken. You dirty rat. I don't know if he's telling the truth at this stage, but if he's lying, wow, that's so shady. Ashley, however, also provided statements, speaking with South Carolina Law Enforcement Division agent Casey Kirkland, within approximately 12 hours of Audrina's hospitalization. In her interview, Ashley maintained Lewis was watching TV while she was asleep, except for the 2 times Lewis woke her, one to ask about food and one when he rushed in with Audrina. Now, while the interviews were going on, and despite the best efforts of medical professionals, Audrina's injuries were too severe. She survived for 3 more days before being removed from life support. She passed away October 17, 2009. The official cause of death was determined to be homicide by mistreatment, a conclusion that no one, including Ashley, would dispute during the subsequent legal proceedings. Now, during Audrina's hospitalization, Alexander Brown, he was the hospital chaplain at South Regional. He met with Ashley and Lewis to provide emotional and spiritual support during this devastating time. Brown's testimony would later become significant in the legal proceedings. According to Brown, Lewis explained he was the only person awake. He had been watching TV when he realized he hadn't checked on Audrina for a while. Lewis described finding the child in an unusual position. She was sideways with her face careened against the side of the crib. Normally, her normal posture would be head to foot. What struck Brown as particularly odd was a comment Lewis made during his explanation. In the middle of describing how he found Audrina, Lewis suddenly said that the child did not like him, but he loved her. Brown, the chaplain, found this statement concerning, later testifying that it appeared to be a statement that had the possibility of having guilt behind it. Brown also noticed that both Ashley and Lewis seemed concerned but collected, rather than displaying the level of emotional distress one might expect from caregivers in such a situation. They appeared united in this story and understanding of what was going on. I don't think Ashley knew that Lewis had ratted her out to the police. And as the investigation continued, evidence emerged suggesting that Audrina may have suffered previous injuries. You see, in the weeks leading up to her death, Ashley had taken her daughter to the pediatrician 3 times to treat a rash. The same type of small red spots that were found on her body when she was hospitalized were there 3 weeks before. Furthermore, Daniel Hepburn, Audrina's father, he said he noticed a chipped tooth and a mark on his daughter's forehead. When he questioned Ashley about these injuries, she claimed the mark caused by Audrina was when she accidentally touched the crib, but she did not know how her tooth had been chipped, suggesting it must have happened with her being a little kid. More concerning was Daniel's testimony about Ashley's reaction when he asked about the rash. He stated Ashley became defensive right away and insisted that no one choked her, even though Daniel hadn't suggested choking as a cause. This defensive response raised questions about whether Ashley knew more about the cause of these marks than she was admitting. And despite these concerning signs, both Davis and Crumley, who lived in the home, testified Ashley was a good and loving mother who was attentive to her children. In fact, Daniel himself even said Ashley was a good mother who had nursed Audrina when she was born prematurely and was never violent with the children. So, the case against Ashley and Brandon moved forward, with both defendants invoking their right to a jury trial. The state chose to prosecute them as co-defendants in a joint trial that took place February 2011. At the close of the state's evidence, Ashley's defense team moved for a directed verdict, arguing that the prosecution had failed to present substantial circumstantial evidence that Ashley committed this crime. Her counsel contended that the state's evidence merely rose to the level of suspicion, which was insufficient to survive a directed verdict motion. They argued that the state had only proven Ashley was in the home when Audrina sustained her fatal injuries, not that she was the one who inflicted them. The trial judge denied this motion, finding that it could be logically deduced from the evidence that one of the 2 defendants had mistreated Audrina. The judge stated that the jury would receive a mere presence instruction and would have the opportunity to evaluate witness credibility before reaching their verdict. When Ashley took the stand in her own defense, her testimony largely corroborated the state's evidence. She described it as a normal day, confirming the dinner routine, bath time, and the evening's activities. She acknowledged that Audrina was tired and irritable at night, which led her to give the child a bottle and the Aura gel. Ashley testified about the argument with Lewis and confirmed she had touched Owen when he refused to brush his teeth. She maintained she never used corporal punishment and that the only time she had ever used it on either child was that one moment with Owen. And regarding her relationship with Lewis, Ashley testified they'd been dating for 6 months. She noted Audrina would cry and cling to her when Lewis was around, but she hadn't thought that this was unusual at the time. Crucially, Ashley testified Lewis was the only person when all of this happened when Audrina sustained her injuries and was therefore the only person who could have done this. She described Lewis as acting odd and collected when he brought the child to her, contrasting his demeanor with her own panic realizing Audrina was not responsive. Ashley also provided context about her personal circumstances. She said Audrina was born prematurely and spent 8 weeks in the NICU, during which Ashley spent every day at the hospital. The stress of the premature birth had contributed to problems in her marriage with Daniel, leading to their separation. So then, Brandon Lewis, his defense painted a markedly different picture. His testimony revealed details that hadn't been included in his initial statement. It created a narrative that directly implicated Ashley in Audrina's injuries. Lewis testified about the argument earlier that day, confirming Ashley did touch him after he called her an inappropriate name. He described Ashley as being stressed about not receiving a job offer, and despite this conflict, he returned to her home that evening. Now, his accounts of the evening's events aligned with Ashley's testimony, but then he diverged. He confirmed the argument with Owen and testified that he had never known Ashley to strike her children before. However, he described Ashley's discipline of Owen as more severe than she's admitting, claiming she yanked him by the arm and then he heard so many noises from the child. Most significantly, Lewis testified about hearing Audrina crying, then hearing Ashley's footsteps as she went to the child's room. He described the crying as different from Audrina's normal crying, with short pauses in between that made it sound she could have been shaken. He testified after Ashley went into Audrina's room, the crying stopped and Ashley returned to her bedroom. Lewis claimed that when he later checked on Audrina, he found her in an unusual position, lying horizontally, face down, with her head against the bars of the crib. When he tried to straighten her, he noticed she was bleeding from the mouth, barely breathing, and completely limp. So, on March 3rd, 2011, after hearing all the evidence and testimony, the jury reached their verdict. They found Ashley Hepburn guilty of homicide by child mistreatment. They sentenced her to 45 years. Brandon was found guilty of aiding and abetting homicide. He was sentenced to 10 years, suspended upon service of 7 years. And I think the footsteps was one of the biggest pieces of evidence used. And following the trial, Daniel Hepburn, the father, he said, "I am very happy and very surprised at the same time. As for Brandon, I feel sorry for what he has gone through and I blame him in no way for my daughter's death. Before the trial, I had resentment toward Brandon, but after the trial, learning the truth, I do not have resentment and want to help him in any way possible." He said, "Losing Audrina has ruined a lot of lives. I don't want to see Brandon's life ruined." This is interesting, because remember, what evidence is there really that she did this or that he did this? No fingerprints, DNA, or anything like that. But for Daniel to side with Brandon firstly tells you what he thinks of Ashley to begin with. Even Audrina's grandmother, Rita Ebel, she said, "I'm very happy with the way the trial went. Ashley got what she deserved. I'm truly sorry for the Lewis family after finally learning the truth. My heart is breaking for them. This has been a long 16 months and I am pleased justice has been served. We should not have been in court today. Audrina's brother should be playing with his little sister. Ashley's temper just got in the way." However, the legal proceedings were far from over. But that's an indication of what the family thought of Ashley as a person. You see, Brandon's conviction was later reversed by the Court of Appeals, while Ashley's case made its way to the Supreme Court. In a significant development, the South Carolina Supreme Court ultimately reversed Ashley's conviction, finding that the Circuit Court had erred in denying her motion for a directed verdict. The Supreme Court concluded that the evidence presented was insufficient to support a conviction beyond a reasonable doubt. And as much as it pains me, I think I agree. The Supreme Court's decision highlighted a fundamental principle of criminal law, that just being at the crime scene doesn't make you culpable. It's not sufficient to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, because that's all they had. All they had was either one was there. The court found that while the evidence clearly established Audrina died from mistreatment and that only Ashley or Lewis could have been responsible, it did not provide sufficient evidence to determine which of the two actually did it. All they had was the footsteps I mentioned. And this case illustrates the challenges inherent in prosecuting crimes that rely heavily on circumstantial evidence. When the medical evidence clearly established Audrina had been the victim of mistreatment and the timeline of events narrowed the possible perpetrators to just 2 people. But the evidence did not definitively point to either Ashley or Lewis as the sole perpetrator. The prosecution's case against Ashley relied largely on Lewis's testimony about the footsteps and Audrina's cries, combined with the fact that she was Audrina's mother and caregiver. However, Lewis's credibility was questionable given his initial failure to mention these crucial details in his police statement. See, he gave 2 statements. First of all, he said, "I don't know what happened," but in the second statement, he blames Ashley. Similarly, the case against Lewis was based primarily on his opportunity to harm Audrina while Ashley was asleep. However, Ashley's testimony that Lewis was the only person awake during the critical time was not corroborated by independent evidence. And the reversal of Ashley's conviction leaves many questions unanswered. If Ashley did not harm the daughter, why did Lewis initially lie to protect her? If Lewis was responsible, why would he bring the injured child to Ashley and call for help? The medical evidence clearly established someone did something to Audrina, causing fatal injuries, but the legal system ultimately concluded we have no idea who did it. And of course, the tragedy of her death extended far beyond the loss of her life. Ashley spent years in prison before her conviction was overturned, separated from her surviving son Owen during crucial years of his development. Brandon, whose conviction again was reversed, attempted self-deletion in the days following Audrina's death and lived under the shadow of suspicion for years. The case also took a toll on the extended family, including Daniel Hepburn, who had to relive the breakdown of his marriage and the loss of his daughter in a very public forum. Davis and Crumley, who were living in the house they provided a home for Ashley and her children, found themselves witnesses in a case that would change their lives. And today, more than a decade after Audrina's death, the question of who was responsible for her injuries remains unanswered. The medical evidence clearly established mistreatment, but the legal system was unable to answer what happened. The outcome, while frustrating, reflects the reality that not all crimes can be solved to the satisfaction of the legal standards. The reversal of both convictions means that in the eyes of the law, the question of who did this to Audrina remains open. Tell me what you think of that. I'm now going to move on to the next story. This is just as insane. Now, on a quiet Sunday morning, June 2011, emergency responders in the state of Georgia received a call that would uncover one of the most heartbreaking cases in the state's recent history. What began as a routine wellness check would reveal a pattern of systematic mistreatment. This ultimately claimed the life of 2-year-old Kaylee Kipp and left her 2-year-old sisters traumatized. At 12:37 on June the 12th, 2011, emergency personnel were dispatched to an apartment complex after receiving a frantic 911 call about a 2-year-old who wasn't breathing. The emergency team arrived within 4 minutes, but what they found would haunt them forever. In a portable crib lay the cold, stiff, and discolored body of Kaylee Kipp, and the paramedic who first examined her immediately knew Kaylee had been gone for an extended period of time. Her body was already in full rigor mortis. The apartment belonged to Deanna Kipp, Kaylee's mother, who lived there with her 3 daughters and her boyfriend Stephen Clark. Now, when responders first entered the apartment, they found no adults anywhere, only Kaylee in her crib. It wasn't until later that another responder encountered Deanna in the apartment. Deanna's behavior from the moment they arrived was deeply troubling. When questioned about the morning's events, she claimed she had checked on Kaylee at 9 a.m., stating Kaylee had looked up at her from the crib, then she went back to sleep. But what was most disturbing was Deanna's complete lack of emotion. She didn't ask any questions about her daughter, about any vital signs or a condition or anything. You see, earlier that morning, Deanna had approached a neighbor and asked to borrow his cell phone to call 911. The man who'd lent her the phone observed her during the call and noticed something unsettling. When the 911 operator instructed Deanna to reach into Kaylee's crib, she appeared to struggle, acting like she was wanting to try to help the baby like she couldn't do it. At this point, Kaylee was already lying face down in her crib. When police arrived at the scene to assist paramedics, they had to actively search for Deanna, eventually finding her standing outside the apartment. She told them they couldn't enter because she had mistakenly locked the door. Okay, well then open it, you muppet. Because to police, she was deliberately trying to guard the entrance. Her demeanor struck them as completely wrong for the situation. Her emotional responses seemed almost forced, and at times she would utter what sounded like a fake cry. Now, Stephen Clark, Deanna's live-in boyfriend, had been at the apartment from 9:30 p.m. the night before, meaning he was present during the critical hours where Kaylee likely died. However, he had left for work before these responders arrived. When Clark returned to the scene, his behavior was disturbing. Neither he nor Deanna exhibited any emotion, and remarkably, they didn't ask each other, "Oh, what's happened to Kaylee?" This lack of natural curiosity of grief struck investigators as highly suspicious. Following Kaylee's death, her two older sisters, there was a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old, were examined by a nurse practitioner trained in evaluating victims. What they found was horrifying. Both girls had numerous injuries consistent with mistreatment, and during interviews with a child psychologist, both girls expressed their terror at Stephen. The older sister revealed that their mother Deanna knew about the moments Clark administered, and that Deanna had been present when Clark made Kaylee cry the night before. The details that emerged from the child's testimonies painted a picture of systematic injuries. The girls were placed in temporary foster care, where they began to open up about their horrific experiences. They told their foster mother they weren't allowed to go outside, and that Clark injured them regularly, and that on one of their birthdays he had came into her room, used a pillow on her legs and behind. Most chillingly, one of the sisters revealed she had heard Kaylee being injured on the night before the passing. The next morning, Deanna had told one of the sisters to check on the baby. When the kid found Kaylee, the toddler was already cold. She later said that Kaylee had been thrown into her crib like a basketball. Now, the children's testimonies revealed a household ruled by fear and violence. The kids told a Child Protective Services investigator Clark had tried to kill her, explaining that he would hold the girls into pillows if they were bad. When the kids had tried to tell their mother Deanna about Clark's behavior, Deanna had dismissed the concerns, telling her daughter to stop joking. Even at Kaylee's funeral, more injuries continued to be revealed. When the Child Protective Services investigator spoke to Deanna, telling her that her daughters were going to be placed in foster care, she didn't care. She said, okay. She showed no concern for losing her remaining children. Both surviving sisters suffered from recurring nightmares and lived in constant fear that they would die like their baby sister. The trauma they endured would require years of therapy. Now, during the police interviews, disturbing details continued to emerge. Deanna admitted to investigators she had witnessed Clark injuries on all the little girls, with significant force putting his hands over their mouths and forcing Kaylee's face into the pad of her crib. In one particularly chilling statement, Deanna told police that now she had the family she always wanted, a comment that suggested a disturbing detachment from the reality of her daughter's death. Deanna also admitted she did watch Clark with the children on the night of Kaylee's murder and had seen him push Kaylee's face into the crib. And throughout the investigation, she continuously presented timelines of events that contradicted the physical evidence, including the advanced stage of rigor mortis found in Kaylee's body. Now, the autopsy results were also devastating. A forensic child pathologist found that Kaylee had sustained multiple injuries to her head, neck, which was consistent with blunt force trauma. The pooling of blood on the front of Kaylee's body indicated she had been lying on her belly, pressed against an object like the mattress or pad of her crib. The pathologist identified knuckle marks from an adult's hand and evidence of considerable impact or pressure. Most heartbreakingly, the autopsy revealed at least 6 distinct areas of impact inside Kaylee's scalp. Her death was caused by multiple head injuries from blunt force trauma, which caused her brain to swell, combined with possible asphyxiation. The medical examiner determined that Kaylee had been touched at least 6 times, likely with an adult fist. And perhaps most tragic of all, Kaylee's death was not immediate, her suffering prolonged, and she might have survived if she had received medical attention in that time. She died alone in her crib, while the adults who should have protected her did nothing. Physical evidence also linked Clark directly to all of this. You see, Kaylee's blood and saliva were detected on a pair of denim shorts found in Clark's bedroom. The size of the shorts were consistent with Clark's size, not Deanna's, indicating Clark had held Kaylee's face down in his lap. This case represents one of the most tragic failures in child protection system history. Now, both Stephen and Deanna were arrested and charged with murder. However, prosecutors then filed new charges against Deanna, with concealing the death of another and providing false statements to police. Stephen himself was convicted of 1 count of malice murder, 4 counts of felony murder, 3 counts of cruelty to a child in the first degree, and 1 count of aggravated assault. He was sentenced to life. Deanna faced 1 count of malice murder, 4 counts of felony murder, 5 counts of cruelty to a child in the first degree, and 1 count of aggravated assault. Diana was also charged with failing to seek medical care, in addition to being responsible for her toddler's death. Diana was sentenced to life in prison. Now, this is a much lesser known case, but I had to share it because who knows Kaylee's story? There wasn't much information online, hence why this story is a bit shortened. But Stephen was clearly angry at something and took it out on the children. As for Diana, sitting there like a lemon, letting him do all of this, I don't know where the sisters are today, but I hope they're able to move on in their lives. Comment, tell me what you think.